in some years, to something like 28% of the GDP of the country. And yet we're not seeing that those benefits trickle down to the communities. And so it's a major issue of social justice for a number of reasons, both in South Africa and in Lesotho. So in the post-apartheid era, I think there's been an expectation that the benefits of this water transfer scheme through the Vaal River system would help to alleviate water scarcity and stresses within the broader residential areas of Gauteng, particularly in formerly disadvantaged areas, currently still disadvantaged areas, townships and location communities. And we're not seeing that. That's not happening. The water is still primarily going to the wealthy areas and to support mining and industry. In Lesotho, what we found is that with the development of the two existing dams, is that there's been mass displacement of people. And this has not been a participatory process. This has not been a situation where people have been widely consulted or effectively compensated for being removed from what has been their ancestral land and also the means of their livelihoods, for particularly livestock and agriculture, other forms of agricultural development. So the whole process of the Lesotho Highlands, and we can understand why, because of its apartheid era origins, has not been about connecting with the community, has not been about understanding the need to supply water, whilst also recognising the needs of the local communities from where this water is being collected and transferred. So in addition to losing access to ancestral lands and livelihoods, there's been a lack of compensation, as I suggest, because of high levels of corruption within the system, and very little opportunity for people to be able to respond to that within Lesotho, to be able to demand of the government compensation, to have access to information and knowledge around the construction of these dams. So it's proven to be a very contentious issue. And in the context of climate change and climate variability, there will be parts of Lesotho that are more prone to flooding, whilst others will be more prone to drought. And we also know that in South Africa, the potential for drought is much higher, particularly in Gauteng, which is a water scarce province, and yet has the highest density of industry and also residential domestic demands on water supply. So the justice is transnational in the sense, the justice issue is transnational in the sense that we are trying to understand how this flow of water might enhance justice in terms of access to water resources amongst local communities in South Africa, and it doesn't seem to be doing that, but also the impact on communities in the Lesotho Highlands areas which have been affected by the dams. There's been some benefits. I don't want to suggest that the Highlands, the water project has been totally bad for the communities. There have been communities that have benefited in ways that they've been able to develop or grow alternative crops, particularly fruit trees. So there's been quite a lot of orchard development, for example, and to broaden the array of crops that they can produce. But those benefits are not shared equally. They're not being experienced by everybody within the communities, and a very small number of people have actually seen any of the compensation or the royalties that have come from the water supply. And in the context of climate change, where drought is likely to increase in parts of Lesotho, and they already are in a situation where there's only between 9 and 13% of land that's cultivatable, then we're going to see greater experiences of soil erosion and potential deforestation, which would obviously cause flash floods and runoff, so a kind of opposite situation to drought. But both in relation to water will affect people's security, livelihood security, food security, even water security. And if we think about it in terms of a project where there's a transfer scheme, we see pipes going past villages that are not benefiting from this scheme, delivering their water to somebody else. And they're not all accessing the hydroelectricity that they should be potentially benefiting from. This is one of the main advantages of the Lesotho, proposed advantages of the Lesotho project, Highlands project for the country, and yet that hydroelectricity actually on the scale that has been required is not there. So climate change is going to really impact water scarcity and stress across the region, and yet South Africa and Lesotho at the kind of high national levels are negotiating still around transfer, because industry is growing in South Africa and the demand is continuing, how is it that we're going to continue to take the water from Lesotho and meet the needs of the Lesotho communities and their water needs? So some of those communities in a country that is water rich are actually now going to also suffer water scarcity. Job creation in the construction industry, and so far there's been estimates around 9,000 jobs that have been created, and skills development in relation to the construction. But the ecological damage of the dams, the flooding of valleys, as I've indicated before, of ancestral lands, of cultivatable land, is very alarming for local communities that live on a subsistence basis. And so now they're having to diversify and look for alternative means of employment and income. And yet at the same time, the number of migrants from Lesotho going into South Africa because of xenophobia, for example, has declined. So there also other opportunities for income and livelihoods is also diminishing. So although that doesn't seem to relate to water specifically, the relationship of these things matters greatly. If people are in flood situations and they don't have access to potable water, and they don't have access to appropriate sanitation facilities, which in many of these rural areas it still isn't available in Lesotho, then we're going to see an increase in health challenges. So these are all social justice issues in relation to health, in relation to spread of communicable diseases. We're already in a context where HIV/AIDS is so prominent. Access to this infrastructure, which is concentrated in in Maseru, the capital, but also in smaller towns, but not in these highland areas, makes access to those resources very difficult. Not just livelihoods, but health. We can think about social justices in broad terms and think about who's being affected most, and it's women within these communities, because they are often the ones that are responsible for the farming and are now having to, and for searching for fuel wood, for example, all of these things that they now are not as accessible as they were before. So people are having to be innovative in terms of thinking about the kind of food products that they can access, how they can access water and when. And so the future looks quite alarming in some senses for many of the communities within the project. But there are cooperatives emerging where communities are working together to diversify their agricultural production, to make it sustainable within the community, and to do microfinancing schemes in the areas that have been affected by the dam. So there's a lot of grassroots efforts to improve resilience in these communities, and I think that needs to be explored. Moving forward, we need to really think about having better planning and assessment processes that take into consideration the social justice aspects of these developments, because this is a technological solution to a challenge that South Africa and Lesotho face, and yet it hasn't really been addressed in terms of social justice. It hasn't been looked at from the ground up, from a human perspective, and that's one of the biggest issues for me. And greater knowledge and awareness amongst the community about the project and the potential benefits and challenges that they face, and how climate change and climate variability is going to impact that. So education is really critical, and enabling people to understand their rights and how to have a voice within these processes. And that's one of the biggest challenges that we face moving forward.
Fantastic. All right. We did overlap.
How many?